Let's read Jeremiah 38. Let's go to the next slide. There we go. That's good. Now, Shephatiah, the son of Mattan, Gedaliah, the son of Pashur, Jukal, the son of Shelemiah, and Pashur, the son of Malchiah, heard the words that Jeremiah spoke to the people, saying, Thus says Adonai, he that remains in this city will die by the sword, by famine, and by plague. But anyone who goes out to the Chaldeans will live, so he will keep his life like the spoils of war, and he will live. Thus says Adonai, the city will surely be given into the hand of the army of the king of Babylon, and he will capture it. Then the officials said to the king, This man should now be put to death, since he demoralizes the men of war remaining in this city, as well as all the people, by speaking such words to them. For this man is not seeking the shalom of this city, but calamity. Then King Zedekiah said, Here he is in your hand, for the king cannot do anything against you. So they took Jeremiah and they cast him into a cistern pit of Malchiah, the king's son, which was in the courtyard of the guard, lowering Jeremiah down with ropes. Now in the pit there was no water, but only mud, and Jeremiah sank into the mud. Now Ebed-Melech, an Ethiopian official in the king's palace, heard that they had put Jeremiah into the pit. While the king was sitting at the Benjamin gate, Ebed-Melech went out from the king's palace, and he spoke with the king, saying, My lord the king, these men have done evil in all that they have done to Jeremiah the prophet, whom they cast into the pit. He is likely to die right there where he is from hunger, for there is no more bread in the city. Then the king commanded Ebed-Melech, the Ethiopian, saying, Take 30 men from here with you and bring the prophet Jeremiah up out of the cistern before he dies. So Ebed-Melech took the men with him and went into the king's palace under the storehouse, and from there he took out worn-out clothes, worn-out rags, and he lowered them by ropes into the cistern pit to Jeremiah. And Ebed-Melech, the Ethiopian, said to Jeremiah, Now put these worn-out clothes and rags under your armpits and under the ropes. And Jeremiah did so. And then he pulled Jeremiah out of the pit. But Jeremiah remained in the courtyard of the guard. Then Zedekiah the king sent for the prophet Jeremiah and received him at the third entrance of the house of Adonai. The king said to Jeremiah, I am going to ask you something. Hide nothing from me. And Jeremiah said to Zedekiah, If I tell you, won't you surely put me to death? Besides, if I give you counsel, you won't listen to me. So Zedekiah the king swore secretly to Jeremiah, saying, As Adonai lives, that gave us life, I will not put you to death, nor will I give you into the hand of these men seeking your life. Then Jeremiah said to Zedekiah, Thus says Adonai Elohim Tzavaot, the God of Israel, If you go out to the officers of the king of Babylon, then your soul will live, and this city will not be burned with fire, and you and your household will survive. But if you do not go out to the officers of the king of Babylon, then this city will be handed over to the Chaldeans, and they will burn it with fire, and you will not escape out of their hand. Zedekiah said to Jeremiah, I am afraid of the Judeans who have already deserted to the Chaldeans, lest they hand me over to them and they abuse me. Jeremiah said, They will not hand you over. Please obey the voice of Adonai in what I am speaking to you, so that it will go well with you and that your soul will live. But if you keep refusing to go out, this is the word that Adonai has shown me. Soon, all of the women who are left in the palace of the king of Judah will be brought out to the officers of the king of Babylon. And those women will say, Your close friends have misled you and prevailed over you. Your feet are sunk in the mire, and they deserted you. And then they will bring out all of your wives and your children to the Chaldeans, and you shall not escape out of their hand, but shall be seized by the hand of the king of Babylon, and this city will be burned down with fire. Then Zedekiah said to Jeremiah, Let no one know of these words, and you will not die. But if the officials hear that I have talked with you, and they come to you and say to you, Tell us now what you said to the king, hide nothing from us, and we will not put you to death. And what did the king say to you? Then you will tell them, I was presenting my petition before the king, not to make me return to Jonathan's house to die there. When all the officials came to Jeremiah and questioned him, he told them just these words that the king had commanded him. So they stopped speaking to him, since the matter was not overheard. Then Jeremiah stayed in the guard's courtyard until the day that Jerusalem was captured. And I want to read the next verse. Now, when Jerusalem was captured, in the 9th year of King Zedekiah of Judah, in the 10th month, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon and all his army advanced against Jerusalem and besieged it. All right, Zedekiah's fear of man. Last time we talked about the fear of man. Zedekiah ends up being one of the most passive, useless kings that the Jewish people have had. We talked about a little bit about this passage last time. And when we begin this passage, we see some familiar officials, people like Pashur, who we saw in chapter 21, and Jeuchal, who's in chapter 37, along with some new people, so Shephatiah and Gedaliah, who is possibly Pashur's son. They all come to King Zedekiah, and their complaint might even sound very logical, might even sound patriotic. It's like Jeremiah is causing the people to defect to the enemy. He's causing the soldiers to lose heart in fighting this battle, because all he's saying is that we're going to lose, and that the only way to win is to give yourself up to the Chaldeans. So it might sound patriotic. Jeremiah's words are discouraging the soldiers who are left, and they're not wrong from that assessment. The armies of Babylon have now been surrounding Jerusalem for about 2 years. There was a short break in the middle, which we talked about, but there's about 2 years under siege. And we know that many people already have defected to Nebuchadnezzar. We read that in 2 Kings chapter 25. I'm just going to jump over there. 2 Kings, one of the last chapters in 2 Kings. And I will read verse 11. Then the remnant of the people who were left, so this is after Jerusalem is destroyed, then the remnant of the people who were left in the city, the deserters who had defected to the Babylonian king and the rest of the populace, Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, exiled them. You see, there were quite a few defectors, deserters, and the author of Kings writes them as deserters. And that's how it was seen in Jeremiah's day, right? They were seen as deserting, leaving their post. So these officials come to the king and ask him to put Jeremiah to death. What is it called for when you betray your country? A traitor. Treason. For treason. Put him to death for treason. And then what does the king say? It's one of the weakest, pathetic statements a king has ever said. King Zedekiah says, "Here he is in your hand, for the king cannot do anything against you." How weak this king had become. Do whatever you want because I can't do anything to stop you. What sort of statement is that? These officials come, the king can't do anything against you, and they throw Jeremiah into a pit. I just want to read this quote. Zedekiah, in yet another example of his moral weakness and his fear of man, puts Jeremiah's fate into the hands of his officials, making the ludicrous excuse that he, as king, can do nothing to oppose them. As Freeman comments, what a contrast this confession of weakness makes with the autocratic power which was normally wielded by an Oriental king. My wife and I and my daughter recently watched the movie Anna and the King. It's an Oriental king of Siam, right? And the king's word is law. The king's word, his word is law. It's not like with our politicians. We go and argue with our politicians and, they might try and file a grievance against us. Sometimes we throw shoes at them and we might get arrested because that's, bodily harm. But that's not the same as a king. In the movie, Anna Leonor walks up to the king. Everybody else is on their face, by the way. And she just walks up as a British citizen. And all of a sudden, she has about 4 swords right by her head, ready to chop her head off. And they were ready to chop her head off. And it wasn't only the king's word that stopped them. He said, no. That's the sort of king we're talking about, or supposed to be talking about. But what's this guy? A poser, a fake, a fraud. I don't know. He's just so terrified of man that he won't even deal with his own responsibilities. And so what we see is that Jeremiah is treated just like Joseph. You remember the story? Jeremiah is in the lowest place he's ever been. I found a picture of a cistern, not much water in that pit, so I guess it could be similar. He's been faithful to Adonai, and in reality, he's been faithful to all the people that he's been speaking to. All the other prophets said that the king of Babylon wasn't coming. Oh, he's not going to come. And then when he came 10 years earlier, they're like, oh, but he'll come back and he'll give you all your stuff back. And when he came back and laid siege again, who's the last man standing who's told the truth the entire time? He's been faithful to the people, and yet he is now rejected, made fun of. He's been beaten. He was thrown in jail. He was thrown in prison. And now he finds himself in an old water cistern, sinking down in the mud. There's nothing. And you just imagine, I mean, he knows the story of Joseph. He must feel just like Joseph. He's like, I've been left here to die. I now know what it feels like to be like Joseph. Everything stripped from me. Everything. I'm just going to read you the passage on Joseph because there's a couple of things I just want to pull out. Genesis 37. I'll start at verse 18. Then they saw him from a distance before he was close to them. This is his brothers. So Joseph's brothers seized Joseph from a distance before he was close to them. They plotted together against him in order to kill him. And they said to one another, here comes the master of dreams. Come on now, let's kill him and throw him into one of those pits so that we can say that an evil animal has devoured him. And then we'll see what happens of his dreams. But Reuben heard, and he rescued him out of their hands, saying, we must not beat him to death. He did it in order to rescue him from their hand, to return him to his father. And Reuben said to them, do not shed blood. Throw him down into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him. So as soon as Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of the tunic, the long-sleeved tunic that he had on, coat of many colors. And they took him and threw him into the pit. Now the pit was empty with no water in it. That's exactly where Jeremiah is, with nothing. No food, a little bit of muddy water. If there's mud, there's water. There's a tiny bit of muddy water that he can drink. No latrine. He's sunk in the mud. Nothing. No friends, it would seem, and no hope. Nothing except a God who loves him and has not left him. That's a big accept, isn't it? And just as with Joseph, God has not left him, even though he has lost everything for doing the right thing. You've got to remember part of the reason why Joseph was in this boat. I mean, he had these dreams. I mean, nobody is responsible for their dreams. I've said this recently. The dreams have one of three origins. Dreams either come from God, they come from the other guy, the devil, or they come from yourself. And I usually called those ones pizza dreams. You eat pizza the night before, for me, I mean, it just happens. And then all of a sudden you're dreaming about walking pizzas or something crazy. You know, it's just totally whack. And I don't discount the ones from the enemy. I experienced night terrors for many, many years in my life. But Joseph was not responsible for his dreams. They were from God. And he had recognized that they were important enough to share. They were very specific, as God's dreams usually are. Well, Joseph is not really at fault for wanting to share what he dreamed. It was just a dream. It's like, hey, listen to this, what I dreamed. It's crazy. But one of the other reasons that the brothers didn't like him is he'd gone out with a couple of the brothers of the son of Bilhah, and he came back with a bad report of them. Now, his brothers blamed Joseph for telling the bad report to their father. But whose fault is the bad report? Is it really Joseph's? Who was at fault that created the bad report? Well, the brothers. They were shirking off in their responsibilities. They were doing stuff that they weren't supposed to, obviously. It wasn't a false report. It would have said false report. It was a bad report of bad behavior. And so Joseph had shared it, probably because he was pretty close to his dad, and his dad probably asked him and then noticed something on his face, as parents often do. You know, I used to wonder how on earth my mom knew I was lying. I used to wonder that, and then I had kids. And then I didn't wonder anymore. I'm like, oh dear, it is so obvious. When they say it's written all over your face, it is written all over your face. And I'm like, his father, knowing his son, looked at Joseph and probably saw it just as he was walking up and said, what did they do? You know? And Joseph told them. And so the brothers didn't like him, hated him, wanted to kill him. This was the same for Jeremiah. You know, the bad report that Jeremiah has been giving, he's been giving a bad report. There's no doubt about it. He's saying, listen, the city's about to be destroyed. It's going to be burned with fire. You know, it's a bad report. It's like all this stuff, this bad stuff's happening. People don't like to hear that bad stuff's happening. And then Jeremiah goes on and says, and it's your fault. You need to repent. You're worshiping idols. You're doing these other things. You're sinning. And people don't want to hear that they're sinning. They don't want to hear that judgment is coming because of their sin. They don't want to hear that their actions or their lifestyle or their identity is not acceptable to God. They don't want to hear that. Jeremiah had warned the people that their sin of worshiping foreign gods and of spilling innocent blood was bringing judgment. And now he's telling the people that their nationalistic pride would lead to their death. I mean, that's exactly, he's saying, listen, surrender and you'll live. Keep fighting and all of you will die. What sort of thing is that to say in the middle of a war? He's saying, listen, on all the other sins, this is not going to save you. It's only going to make it happen. It's only through bowing the knee to a foreign power of Babylon that they would save their lives. And then we run into this interesting character by the name of Ebed-Melech. Now, how many know what Ebed-Melech means in Hebrew? Oh, wait. There you go. Hebrew word of the day. I forgot to write it out in Hebrew, and I gave you the answer. Silly me. Okay, servant of the king. King's servant. He's the king's servant. I didn't mean to do that. I actually thought it was a question, and I forgot. There you go. The Lord had not forgotten, though. He had not forgotten Jeremiah. And Jeremiah did have a friend. This man by the name of Ebed-Melech. It's a mysterious person from Ethiopia. How many know where Ethiopia is? Yeah, that's right. It's along the Nile, right? The head of the Nile. You know, Ethiopia used to include all of Kenya and Uganda, and it's just it was a whole empire. It's a whole massive kingdom of Ethiopia. And this mysterious person from Ethiopia stands up for Jeremiah. Servant of the king, it's not known who he is, but Ebed-Melech is definitely a title. It could be that he was the local ambassador from Ethiopia. That's very possible. He was a servant of the king of Ethiopia, right? I mean, that's possible. Servant of the king's servant. And he requests King Zedekiah to act righteously and to defend Jeremiah. Something, you know, sometimes all it takes is just one person to point out the ludicrousy of what's going on, or the wickedness of what's going on. You know, it's just one person that stands up in the break room and says, you know, I really don't want to hear that sort of joke. I'm sorry. Listen, I'm married and I have daughters. I don't want to hear that sort of joke. Right? You know, it can be as simple as that. One person, and it'll go quiet. You watch it. He might be hated like Jeremiah was, but it's just one person. In this case, Ebed-Melech was like, this is wrong. You have no reason to kill him. There's no bread in the city already, and you're throwing him into a pit to kill him sooner. It's like basically we're all going to die here. We're all run out of bread. We're trapped in this city, and you're going to kill him sooner. Why? Because you don't like what he said. He's been right the entire time, and you know it. And so Zedekiah not only allows Ebed-Melech to rescue Jeremiah, but he also sends him a contingent of 30 soldiers. Now, where were these 30 soldiers when the king was telling his officers, oh, I have no power to stop you? He had 30 soldiers now. Where did he have 30 soldiers then? It can't be more than a couple, 4 days, right? I mean, you can't last long. You can last a while without food, a couple, maybe a week, but without water? In a pit, a dry pit? So it can't have been that long ago. So he had 30 soldiers. Why couldn't he have done something to protect Jeremiah before? Oh, well, that just tells you his character. Ebed-Melech then comes not only to rescue Jeremiah, but he's actually thinking about, his comfort. He goes in and he gets a bunch of cloths, and he doesn't want the ropes to cut Jeremiah under the armpits. He says, put these cloths under there, some protection just to soften as he's pulling him out of the mud. I don't want to hurt you. And that's care. Not only just saving a life, but being very careful how he did it. Who is this man? We really don't know. Rashi actually, he's a Jewish scholar. He actually points to some old rabbinic traditions that seem to identify Ebed-Melech with the man by the name of Barak, the guy who authored Jeremiah, the scribe. It's possible. I don't know. There's nothing. I would have thought it would have said that it was Barak. It's possible. It's not impossible. I guess we'll have to wait and see when we get to heaven. It would be an interesting twist if that is the case. So then we come up to the king's private meeting. So after Jeremiah is now pulled out of a pit, he's probably pretty shaken. I know I would be. I mean, you've been just thrown into a place to die. And the king invites you to come and says, okay, I want you to tell me the word from God. And Jeremiah's like, wait a second, didn't you just allow me to be thrown into a pit to kill me? I mean, why would I tell you? You're just going to find another reason to kill me again. I mean, you've had me beaten and thrown in jail and thrown into a pit. I mean, come on. And the king's like, no, I'm really serious. I swear by Adonai, you won't die. It's like, really? I mean, this guy's faith, if he has it, is so private that it's literally only between him and God. But I don't know. He's shown as such a weak man because of his fear of man. It's no wonder that Jeremiah was hesitant. But the king insists and Jeremiah complies. Even at this point, Jeremiah, the word that Jeremiah gives is actually the potential for Jerusalem not to be burned. Even at this point, even at this stage of the game, he's saying, listen, if you as the king just surrender, then everybody's life will be spared. You and your family's lives will be spared. And the city won't be burned with fire. I mean, even at this point, God is willing to show mercy. That's mercy in the middle of judgment. Mercy triumphing over judgment. In judgment, we see the mercy of God. But now it's time for the king to truly be afraid. And the king's like, but if I do that, then the people who've already defected, they're going to hurt me. Come on. Jeremiah's like, no, your life will be spared. I mean, Jeremiah is the prophet. He is speaking on behalf of God at this point. I'm pretty sure Jeremiah wanted nothing to do with King Zedekiah. Personally, if I'd been thrown into a pit by the local politician, I just wouldn't be really nice to them the next time I saw them. I just wouldn't have very many nice things to say. I'm sorry. I would really have to be led by the Lord to say something of mercy. But then Jeremiah goes on. He says, listen, if you don't want to listen to me, this is what's going to happen. all of the women in the court, all your wives, concubines, whatever, will be given over to the men of the Chaldeans. You can fill in those blanks. And then those women will come to you. And they will say, I want to read this quote. The women of the palace it was often understood to refer to the royal harem or harem. They will be taken captive by the Babylonian princes, and they will place the blame squarely on Zedekiah, pointing out for the last time in the book what a man-trusting, man-fearing king he has been, epitomizing the cursed man of chapter 17, verse 5. His flaw is obviously no secret to them. And in this statement that they make, it's very interesting. Your close friends have misled you and prevailed over you. This is what the women will say to the king. Your feet are sunk in the mire, and they deserted you. And Jeremiah knows exactly what that feels like, but he's talking about something much worse. The king has found himself in a mire of fear. Fear of man is a snare. I mean, that's what we read, right? So when we fear man, our families are usually the ones to pay the price. Men, will we be courageous and stand up for truth and righteousness? Or will we be passive and say it's not our job? King Zedekiah has feared man instead of fearing God. And now his feet are descending into the miry clay, just as Jeremiah's feet had done. Zedekiah has gone down as one of the most infamous examples of what happens to someone when they fear man instead of obeying God. All right, let's go on to the application. Last time we quoted from Proverbs. We're going to read that passage again. Very simple. The fear of man is a snare, but the one who trusts in Adonai will be kept safe. Too many times we worry about what other people think. We become more concerned with how others will perceive us instead of being concerned with how God sees us. Now, the last time we didn't get to cover all the conclusions that Yeshua made in his teaching in Matthew chapter 10. So we're going to turn to Matthew chapter 10 right now. And we're going to start where Yeshua quotes from the prophet Malachi. So this is Matthew chapter 10, starting at verse 34. Do not think that I came to bring shalom on the earth. I did not come to bring shalom, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his household. He who loves father or mother more than me isn't worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me isn't worthy of me. And whoever does not take up his cross and follow after me isn't worthy of me. He who finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Now, what is Yeshua saying? And what does this passage in Micah refer to? I think Yeshua is referring to recognizing the times that we are living in and not living in some sort of fantasy in our mind. Let's quickly look at Micah chapter 7. Micah chapter 7. Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah. Chapter 7. Verses 1 through 6. Woe is me, for I am like gatherings of produce in summer, like gleanings of a vineyard. There is no cluster to eat, no first ripe fig that I crave. The pious have perished from the land. There is none upright among mankind. All of them lie in wait for blood. A man hunts his brother with a net. Both hands are diligent at doing evil. The official and the judge ask for a bribe. The distinguished man utters a desire of his soul. Thus they weave it together. The best of them is like a prickly bush, the most upright like a thorny hedge. The day of your watchmen, of your visitation is coming. Then their confusion will occur. Do not trust in a friend. Do not trust in a close companion. Guard the openings of your mouth from her who lies on your breast. For son treats his father with contempt. Daughter rises up against mother. Daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. A man's enemies are the people of his own house. That's what Yeshua is quoting from. I want you to recognize the context. The context here is of a culture, a society that has completely gone away from God. You can see that there's no one righteous, not one, none righteousness. In fact, Paul actually quotes this in Romans. There is no one righteous, no, not one. Everybody's asking for bribes. You know, the judge, the official, they're all asking for bribes. Brothers going after brother. You see, there's just no pious people left in the earth. And in that sort of environment, if you're the one saying this is the way of salvation, you have to humble yourself and repent. You're not very popular. And it may be your sons or your daughters who turn you in, or your fathers or your mothers who turn you in to the authorities. I vaguely remember that happening several times before. But Micah goes on. In verse 7, we see that Micah is speaking of a time when no one is righteous, a time when sin is prevalent and no one even seems to try to be good. So what is the hope? The hope is the same hope that Micah has, going on in verse 7. But I will watch for Adonai. I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. Do not rejoice over me, O my enemy. Though I have fallen, I will arise. Though I sit in darkness, Adonai is my light. I will bear the indignation of Adonai because I have sinned against him until he pleads my cause and executes judgment for me. He will bring me out to the light, and I will behold his righteousness. Then my enemy will see it, and shame will cover her. She who said to me, where is Adonai your God? My eyes will gaze at her. Now she will be trampled like mud in the streets. This is our hope. Our hope is in the Lord. And this is exactly what Yeshua is pointing at. Our hope is to be justified, to be vindicated by God, that we would be considered righteous before the Lord. Now remember, when Yeshua quotes one passage, we're supposed to go and read the whole chapter. There's always two sides for God's judgment. There are those who are experiencing God's judgment and those for whom God is judging on behalf of. Just like in any court case, you have those who win and those who lose, right? There are those being judged in favor of, and that's who we want to be in God's judgment court. That the Lord would judge in favor of us. And says, here's the prophet saying, I will watch for Adonai and I will wait for the God of my salvation. We see the author of Hebrews says the same thing. See, we are focusing on Yeshua, the author and perfecter of our faith. For the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and he has taken a seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Now, why do I bring that up? Because he is our model. For the joy that was set before him, and a lot of people say, oh, well, we are that joy. I think that's actually a little shallow. I think there's a lot more to it than that. The joy that was set before him. When Yeshua was in the garden and says, he's pleading with God to go any other way. And if you think that there's any other way, then the entire cross was in vain. Because Yeshua said, look, if there's any other way, let's do it that way. But what's the one thing that Yeshua comes back to 3 times? Not my will, but yours be done. What is he saying? He says, I don't want to do this. If there's any way other, I want to do it that way. But I am going to choose to do this. to honor you. I believe that the joy that was set before Yeshua was the acceptance of the Father. It was this recognition from the Father that as Yeshua ascended into heaven, I am certain that all of heaven was screaming his name, screaming praise to the King of all kings, recognizing what he had done. This is the joy that was set before him, to hear his Father say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." He, Yeshua, is the faithful servant. He is the servant. And the beauty of that is that our joy is the same joy as Messiah's. That's the joy that's set before every single one of us. The joy of standing before him and hearing him say, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in a little. Now I'm going to put you in charge of much." That's the joy. That's what gets me excited. That's what I want to hear more than anything else. Let our names be turned to dust. Let them be turned to mud. They can throw us in the dirt. They can throw us in the mud. It doesn't matter, because there's one person who will speak our name. "Well done, good and faithful servant." There's an old hymn that puts it this way, and I'll close with this. It says, "Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace." Let us choose to turn our gaze onto God. Let us choose to fear God and choose not to fear man. Let us choose to set our love on this heavenly glory and not on earthly accomplishments. Let us set our eyes on Yeshua. Amen. Abba, Father, I am so thankful. Father, I am so thankful that you set before us this prize of unspeakable value. Lord, that we can say, even as Paul said, he says, "I don't know, it's better for me to die and go and be with God. But it's better for you if I remain and stay here on earth to encourage you." Lord, that we would recognize how glorious it will be on that day to stand before you and hear you say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Father, I ask that you would press this into our hearts. Lord, that our eyes would be fixed on you, especially when the times of temptation or struggle comes, when we're tested. Lord, when things are getting worse and worse around us, and that we are called to be that witness. Father, give us the boldness to see beyond, Lord, where we are today, and to put our eyes on you. In Yeshua's name, amen. Amen. All right.